Hello and welcome to the training session on how to tell your story. As a movement ambassador, it's important to think of the most exciting and engaging way to tell your story, because people are going to come up to you when you're trying to get them involved with the movement, and they're going to say, well, what's your story? Why are you doing this? Why are you part of the MS Society? And this is really your opportunity to come up with a really inspirational and exciting story to give back to them. So I want you to think for a minute, what makes a good storyteller? Who do you know that's a good storyteller? Maybe your grandma or grandpa tells really good stories, or your mother or father, or a friend of yours, or maybe it was a motivational speaker or some other kind of professional storyteller. But I want you to think for a minute, who is a good storyteller and why? What makes their stories so good? I was thinking about this just a few minutes ago, and I was thinking about my friend Tina in college. She came home every day with some other fantastic story about something that happened to her that day. And it never ceased to amaze me how engaging and exciting her stories were. And I was thinking about it, and it's because she sets the scene so well. She develops the plot. She explains every detail of what made her day so amazing. She always found some kind of way to really develop the plot and to develop the characters. And this is something that I want you to think about as you develop your story. That every story has to have a beginning. And what's your beginning of your story? So I want you to set your plot and develop your character or characters who might be involved in your story. Secondly, some kind of conflict has to arise. Something has to come up to upset the delicate balance of what's going on in your life or the character's life. So it might be some kind of challenge that you have to face. Maybe it was the first sign of your symptoms, or maybe it was raising money for the Challenge Walk MS. I want you to think about what kind of thing has arisen, because what happens at the climax is where the conflict really comes to a head and we really see the true colors of the character, which in most cases will be you. So what has happened in this conflict that really has risen you to some kind of place where you had to really act? And I want you to think about this in terms of telling your story to a group of people, because this is where you're going to really be able to engage with them, and they're going to be able to see you as a person who is somewhat like them. So maybe they can relate to being a parent, maybe as a parent of someone with MS or a parent with MS, they can relate to that. Or maybe it's being young. Maybe you're talking to a group of people in their early 20s and they can relate to what it's like to be a young person and diagnosed with MS or somehow involved with the MS Society. Or maybe it's being active. Maybe it's having a hobby. Maybe it's having some other kind of physical activity that you enjoy doing. Find some kind of way to relate to them in your story so that when this conflict and this climax arise, it's something that they can relate to and it becomes really meaningful and memorable to them. And then finally, you're going to have a resolution to your story. How have you changed? How has the character changed? How has the entire landscape of the plot changed in the end? And this is something where we can really see the transformation that you may have had in the story. And I want you to not just to tell, but to show. And let me give you an example of that, because this is what really makes a good story. And when I think of my friend Tina, she had descriptions of everything in her day, whether it was what her coworker was wearing, or what the weather was like outside, or what her mood was, or what she ate for lunch. I mean, you don't want to get into too many details, of course, but you really want to show the listener what you're talking about. So instead of saying, my right leg was fatigued, you could say, every time I took a step, it felt like my feet were stuck in buckets of heavy sand. So whether that is accurate for your situation or not, you can decide. But that is just one way of showing instead of telling. Another thing I want you to do when you're thinking about telling your story is ask yourself a few questions. These might help you. For example, who was I before I was diagnosed with MS, or before my loved one was diagnosed with MS? Who am I now? How have I changed? How has it transformed me? Has it changed my patience? my gratitude, my motivation, my strength? What are some of the joys that I have in my life? What are some of my fears? And what have I learned from living with MS or being affected by MS in some way? Those are just a few questions that you can ask yourself as you're preparing for your story. Another thing that I encourage you to do is think about fairy tales and other stories that you might have heard that are maybe childhood stories. And think about how the main character is kind of the hero and how the hero has transformed over the story. So maybe think of yourself as the hero and how you've transformed and overcome obstacles in your own life and put those in your story. So here are a few transformations that I am just going to suggest to you. Transforming from selfish to sharing, from foolish to wise, from wild to tame, from weak to strong, from follower to leader. Those are just a few things, and you can certainly come up with your own transformations, but these are just to get your brain jogging a little bit about how to tell your story. And one of the things that you're going to want to do as you're thinking about your story and having ideas and just kind of exploring your different thoughts is to keep a notebook. Keep a notebook that has your thoughts, descriptions, ideas, transitions, transformations, all kinds of things, because this will be a good place for you to keep that, so if you don't want to do it right now, you can come back to it later and write your story. Also, I encourage you to listen to other people tell stories, just throughout your day. Maybe just be making a very concerted effort to listen to other people in your daily life. Listen to their stories. What makes them good? What makes them not so good? What keeps you engaged in them? Where do you maybe stop losing some of your engagement in their story? Keep track of this in your notebook as well. Third, I want you to practice, and then practice some more, because the more you practice, the more you make it your own. And the more you make it your own, the more compelling you're going to be when you tell your story. And the more compelling you are, the more engaged other people are going to be, and they're going to want to join you in the movement to end MS. And I also want you to think about other storytellers that you've heard, as I mentioned at the beginning of this training. Whether it's your mom, your dad, your grandparent, maybe write their stories down so you can keep those and have them in your notebook as well, and so you can look back and think about what has made their story so good. Another opportunity to practice is on the Movement Ambassador website. There is a section called Share Your Story, and here you can enter your story and it gets sent in email to me, and then I can post that story on the Movement Ambassador website so that other Movement Ambassadors can see your story, and if you want feedback on it, maybe they can give you feedback as well. But this is a good opportunity in a very comfortable and non-threatening environment to share your story and practice telling it. So those are just a few examples I have for how to tell your story and how to make it meaningful and engaging. I hope you'll join me again soon.